Good to have you on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
I think the first question is the most important question. Tell us about that halfway line absolute screamer for Creditspring FC. Talk me through what were the feelings, what were the emotions, what was the score?
Bit of luck, I think, to more than honest. As you know, I'm not exactly a hot shot striker, so yeah, just saw the keeper off his line, took the chance.
You're being modest. Halfway line, keeper was on his line, bottom corner. I loved it.
Yeah, it was a shame we didn't win, but hey, it was nice.
It was nice. Second big question. Who's contributed more to Creditspring FC out of myself and Donny?
Oh, that's a hard question. I'm going to
think about who's interviewing.
I'm going to be slightly diplomatic and say I'll get back to you because I haven't seen enough of you two.
We're waiting for Cam as well.
Yeah,
we'll see what Cam's like.
You've bigged him up quite a bit.
We have bigged him. He was ex-academy, so
okay.
We'll have to see. Talk me through how you got into compliance and why or how you got into the financial services space as well.
Yeah. So it was an accident, like pure accident. So I finished A-levels, didn't fancy university, looked for a job, did a few things for a few years, like wasn't going to be a career, was looking for something. I got to sort of 23, 24, something like that. And I was like, I need something that's going to be more of a career. I can't carry on like this. So I was just applying like anything I could see. And I had some sort of team leader experience, people management experience. So I ended up applying for a job in civil service at the Office of Fair Trading, which was the consumer credit regulator at that time, as a team leader in like the authorizations department. Had no idea about what the consumer credit market was, other than as a young consumer who's had a car finance agreement. But they were looking for people with that people leadership experience and kind of learned the rest on the job. So it kind of went from there, and then quite quickly realised I was like, oh, actually, financial services, start to know more about it. I was like, actually, this is a good way. I could make a good career. So went from there, transferred to the FCA when they took over regulation of the consumer credit space in 2014. The approach I took was like, learn while I'm here, right? It's the regulator, thousands of people, lots of great knowledge there. So, took any opportunity that came, looking for someone to help with this project to do this. Really went from there. Worked at the regulator till 2019, so I was there for maybe 5 or 6 years. Before then, sort of getting to a point where it was like progression into leadership there, which there's a lot of people at the FCA have been there a long time in leadership positions, so opportunities don't come up that often. So decided next step was into in-house, and where I moved into O2, which, although telecommunications, they do loans, they do insurance, and it's kind of gone from there. Done a bit of consulting since then, and now come back in-house and enjoying time at Creditspring.
And with getting into compliance initially, do you think people kind of fall into it like you did, or do you think some people are quite like, that's what I want, like I want to do that?
I don't know. I think you won't find many people who are sort of coming out of university going, I want to be in compliance.
Well, I think most people come out of university, they don't know what they want to do. Really.
People want to do marketing and tech and, coding's a big thing now, engineering. I don't think so, unless maybe you've got like friends or family or sort of that's in it. It's kind of a bit of a niche, but there's there's a lot of jobs in this space.
I think when we speak to compliance people, they always say there's a lack of like mid to senior compliance experts because, like you say, not a lot of people go into it initially, so they lack those early years of experience. Then you get to a point where you're like, well, we need to hire someone at our level, and there's not many people, maybe new people coming in, but not that level of experience.
Yeah, and I think it can be difficult, and I think one of the things is when you kind of move into sort of a more leadership position, it's generally you need to be more than just a technical expert. And I think it probably applies in many fields, right? You kind of often see people who are good in a technical role, delivery role, you kind of progress, and then particularly in an organisation that doesn't support you with that training and development in how to be a good people leader, how to sort of think more strategically, then that's kind of where people fall down, and the same applies to compliance.
And going back to your career path then, obviously from the regulator for a long period of time and then into O2 and now Creditspring. What was that like coming from the FCA and then going into quite a big corporate like O2, and then a step further going into Creditspring?
Yeah, it was eye opening at first. Sort of coming slightly probably cocky in a way. It's just like, and I've got all this technical knowledge at the time at the FCA, know the market, know the products, know all the regulations inside out. And don't forget, sort of one of the first things I did in that role was a sort of a briefing paper on, I forget what it was now, it was for senior management. It's just like this probably 5-page document full of all the technical jargon, citing, quoting conk in the handbook and all this sort of stuff. And I gave it to my manager at the time and kind of looked at him and was just like, I can't do anything with this. Like, I know what this means, but it's not for me. It's for the senior leadership, and they're not in with this jargon, this lingo. You need to write it in plain English, and it's got to be no more than a page. Otherwise, they're not going to read it. That was the sort of the first thing. I think the other thing was tied into communication, which you learn as well. It's about skills in presenting. You didn't really necessarily presenting and sort of getting buy-in from stakeholders. As the regulator, it's kind of like you say, and the firms nod and say yes, and we'll do it generally, right? They don't often push back too much. Whereas you move to in-house, and that's not good enough. You need to be able to explain the why, the benefits, the risks of not doing it to get that buy-in. That was probably two of the biggest changes.
And then the differences between the compliance process at O2 versus Creditspring, obviously O2 being a huge, Telefonica being a huge company versus a startup.
Yeah, I suppose probably processes aren't too different. The biggest difference is in kind of like the breadth of what I do. So in a team with many people focused on quite a narrow thing at O2, because you have big legal departments, big audit functions, big risk teams, whereas smaller organisation subject to the same FCA regulations doing consumer credit products, you've got to wear many hats in a smaller firm, and it makes the day more interesting. So covering financial promotions, product design, product governance, third parties, other firms in the distribution chain, anti-money laundering, gifts and hospitality, anti-bribery and corruption, dealing with the regulator when they want to speak to you, managing the regulatory returns. You get involved in so much with like a lot less resources, so you have to prioritize a lot more. What's the most impactful things to our members at Creditspring and the business, and what's the biggest risks?
Out of all those different areas you mentioned, what do you enjoy the most and what do you enjoy the least?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think for me, I really like the work on product, right? It's if you don't have a good product, the business is never really going to succeed, right? Or certainly won't have sustainable success. Seen particularly in the credit space, firms that didn't have good products, and they may do well for a while, but it's never sustainable. I think that, and the financial promotion stuff is interesting as well, more so in the kind of post-consumer duty era, whereas beforehand everything was very prescriptive and concrete, or it's still there, right? But most stuff is predictive. But now you're looking at it from what is our target audience? How do we communicate with them in the right way? And I think it's kind of blurred the lines a bit between kind of marketing and compliance now, because and it's the same can be said for consumer duty across all four of the outcomes. Things that weren't necessarily compliance metrics too long ago about customer service levels and how quickly you answer the phones and all those kind of things, and now compliance professionals are like, oh, actually, yeah, that really does make an impact for customers. So yeah,
I think compliance professionals getting more into product and marketing early on is a theme that we always see. I think like you say, the metrics now are different. Things that wouldn't have been a compliance metric now are a compliance metric because of consumer duty.
Yeah, and we have to work much more collaboratively. And, there's the old thing about compliance to the people that say no at the end of an inbox or something like that. And, even before consumer duty, good compliance functions, professionals were always trying to get in the room, sometimes be a bit of a nuisance about you need to speak to us earlier. And, you get varying levels of resistance to that. And every firm's different, right? Bigger firms, you probably be in a little bit later because of the volume of stuff that's going on. But yeah, you do have to work a lot closer, particularly working at Creditspring now. We're a smaller, more agile firm. It's a lot more detrimental to us if marketing or product have put all this time into working on a new product, a new initiative, and then a week before they want to go live, that they're only speaking to compliance, and you're like, well, actually, there's some things you've got to think about here. You've got to change some stuff, and doing that earlier engagement definitely helps. At Creditspring we run now once a week, compliance available drop-in session with our colleagues in legal as well, and it's just like open, anyone can come in, even if it's just an idea you just had 10 minutes ago, come and talk to us about it, because we want to be accessible, so that when things are actually coming to the formal approval stages, things are sort of compliant more first time.
Initiatives like that, is that how you try and encourage that behaviour? If you look at FinProms, for example, or product, like what can you implement or embed to try and encourage that early loop compliance in?
Yeah, there's things like that. And it's also the human side of it, like building relationships. Again, it's a bit easier where we are. We've got a single office, everyone's in the same space. But if you're not that big scary compliance function that people think we're not necessarily a human, and we can have a chat and stuff, and you don't build those relationships, people are less likely to come to you. I always where I am now, we do sort of introductory sessions with new joiners, and I sit down and talk through compliance, and I always like to ask people, what do you think compliance is there for? And the amount of times people go, oh, you're there to get us in trouble and stuff like that, and it's like, well, no, actually, we're kind of here to make sure we comply with the regulations, do the right thing by consumers, protect the business as well. It's kind of the other side of that. It's in the business's interest to get these things right, and not make mistakes, and to support the business in doing that. The vast majority of what we do is trying to help people who want to do the right thing kind of do it in line with the regulators' expectations, as opposed to like trying to catch people out who are doing the wrong thing, because most people don't want to do the wrong thing.
Do you find that the best marketers and product people get that, and they from the start loop you in and understand that actually I can get really good opinions or how to do this differently from someone with a different perspective who knows more about this stuff than I do?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I take the approach that kind of we're all consumers as well. We've all got our own experiences with products and things we haven't liked. And you bring those real life experiences and, that sort of diversity of lived experiences around the table. And it works both ways. Our marketeers and our product people will change my mind sometimes. I may see something and have a view on it, and, we'll have a discussion on it. And they may point to some consumer research that they've done that kind of changes my view on what I thought why that might not be okay. And actually through that conversation about sharing ideas and research and information can change our mind. And I think the best teams that work collaboratively have that kind of open approach where they'll listen to other views around the table, even if it's not from that person's necessarily specialist role that they're there to do.
The view of compliance, if you compare that, they're just here to say no and not like listen to us, or there's big scary function. Did you find that at O2? And I wasn't sure how big the consulting firm you worked at was, but do you find the bigger the company, the more that view is embedded? Like, is this big scary function versus like at Creditspring, maybe it's a bit smaller and you're in constant kind of contact?
Yeah, I certainly found at O2 there was a really good culture there in the compliance team that we didn't want to be. So we didn't have a compliance inbox, right? We wanted to be people. The sort of senior leaders in the compliance function, they were really good in terms of being visible in the business. I've got people who've worked in more traditional financial services, and that for a long time has very much kind of been the way that it's. The bigger functions are there. You kind of got that narrow focus, and you're not, building those relationships or you're at the end of an inbox. But I think generally the industry, is changing.
In what way?
In the more receptive into being like working collaboratively. Things like consumer duty have probably helped. I think it's people understand that it works better for everyone when you've got those type of relationships.
When you look at the consumer duty and actually generally the FCA's approach, how has it changed this year alone, but also I suppose in a longer period?
Yeah, it's I think it's an interesting kind of time, sort of in the early stages of consumer duty. The FCA's been sort of focused on a few areas. I think price and value came up in a few sectors quite a bit. They're still, I suppose, finding their feet in a way, and I think it's right. They'd probably give firms a bit of time to adapt as well. We've kind of now got this pro-growth objective now that the government's really pushing them on. So there's that kind of thing taking up a lot of the focus of the regulator, and how are they changing their approach to support that. I think the other thing in the credit sector as well is the motor finance discretionary commissions claim in the Supreme Court judgment due next month. So I think that's really going to take up a lot of the bandwidth in this space for the short term. But they've got the new product sales data coming in later this year, which will kind of the insight that the FCA is going to have into credit providers' portfolios is just going to ramp up massively from a little monthly snapshot which they gather at the moment, which gives you a sort of a summary of the overall book, to over 100 data points for every single loan that's on your books and that you sell on a quarterly basis. So the FCA will have the level of insight that firms have in terms of your performance of your product in terms of arrears rates, customer contacts, all that kind of stuff. So I suspect they will take a bit of time to consume that data, and then you'll probably start seeing some quite focused work on outlier firms first from that data. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting.
Do you think they have the same issue in the sense that they're seen as like hindering growth, and they want to be seen as promoting growth? And if you work with them, you can actually there are initiatives. There's a sandbox for smaller firms. There's pathways to help with innovation. Do you think they suffer with the same kind of stigma, if you like, of they don't want growth? And
yeah, I think so. And
or is it justified?
I think it is. They're a big organisation, right, with different rule books that apply to different sectors, like over 50,000 firms they regulate across, from banking, insurance. So there's going to be variances, I think, when you look at the way they supervise and manage the different sectors. I think it was interesting. There was a House of Lords report the other week saying that they recommended that it needs sort of wholesale change culturally at the regulator to sort of really deliver on that pro-growth agenda, because we're off the kind of what's probably a cycle of an increase in regulation off the back of the 2008 crash, where it was kind of like really risk adverse after what happened, and now that's probably starting to soften a bit. But it's been that kind of way for some time, and that change won't happen overnight. And I think the regulators, to be fair, are probably going to need some sort of guidance from Treasury and the government on where does that kind of line between balancing risk and growth now sit, because it's been kind of where it is for some time.
I think it's interesting when the legal side and the government side kind of gets into it. We look at finfluencers. You saw the parliamentary committee on the use of finfluencers. I know Creditspring use finfluencers. So what's your take on? Because that's quite a recent development, I guess, if you're a compliance officer.
It is. We don't see it any different as any other type of financial promotion. So our process is the same. They come through our compliance team for approval, like any other content. We also do some due diligence when we're looking to bring on a new finfluencer. There's been a couple of there was one last year, I think one this year, announced from the FCA about they're taking legal action or criminal action against some influencers, but there's no details about who it is. I think everyone's kind of working on the assumption they're largely promoting high risk things or giving financial advice when they shouldn't be. So I think if you're steering clear of people that are in that kind of space of influencing, you're probably gonna be okay. But it's like with any third party you work with, you kind of look at what they're doing, what the model is, assess the risks on it, and sort of do your due diligence accordingly.
Do you think it will change how the FCA approaches influencers, the model? Or?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you've got the kind of the regulatory framework in place that you need the authorised firm to be approving the financial promotions, and if you're doing that in a firm that's got a robust financial promotions approval process, then that should work. I think we'll see the FCA continue to take action against individuals or firms that are kind of in breach of the current framework, and that's probably where they'll focus their attention.
And talking about the FinProm approval process, could you just walk us through that at Creditspring and maybe how that then differed to, O2, let's say?
Yeah, so at Creditspring, we mentioned we got that kind of drop-in, so that's the first touch point for a lot of stuff. We have a suite of guidance for our guys that are creating content and marketing. It's we we try and, we're working on it. It's developing, but we try and do it in plain English. We spoke about communication, right? So we try and communicate it in a way that is easy for the audience to understand, in the same way we expect them to do for our members. We do training sessions. We let them know when things have changed, whether that's our internal approach because we've reached a decision on we want to do something differently. So there's all that kind of education and guidance piece. That's all kind of like, sits before the process really. And then, when it actually comes to it, we use Adclear. The marketing guys seamlessly upload the content when they've got there, and it gives them the sort of feedback, and then it comes through to compliance for the final approval before it goes out.
And how do you think that process changes over the next 12 to 18 months? Like, where do you see the FinProm approval process going?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, we're looking at how we can use AI to reduce the sort of or increase the speed in which we can go from them creating an idea to getting it out the door. We like a lot of businesses, different channels, different content. There is a lot of the work that we have to look at. So I think that's the way it will change, and we're hoping with technology like Adclear that it serves as a support tool as well, in terms of that feedback that they can get in real time means that it's a huge efficiency gain, because you haven't got this big queue of first drafts coming through waiting for a person in compliance to look at it, because they're getting that real time feedback or guidance on what may be compliant, what's not. So by the time it comes through to compliance for review, it's right first time.
And that we talked about it earlier, but the use of AI within compliance, but also across businesses. What's your take on how it can be leveraged effectively?
Yeah, look, I'm not, you're going to probably, don't ask me any technical questions right about AI, because I've got very limited understanding from a technical standpoint, but I think the use cases are quite good. I think and what the FCA has been talking about is firms, like they should do with anything, right? Whether it's new processes, think about the governance around it. I think there's a buzz, everyone's excited to use it. Any use case, it looks very good, but you got to think about what are the risks of it, right? And some of it can be quite straightforward. If you're using Copilot, for example, to help you with some drafting some documents, that's pretty straightforward. You're using a Microsoft app in their environment, through to there's some higher risk use cases if you want to start using AI in underwriting decisions or for fraud prevention purposes, where if it goes wrong, the impact to your customers, the impact to the business potentially financially, reputationally, could be huge. I saw a post the other day for, I think it was a software firm that had an AI chatbot, and so a customer asked it a question, it hallucinated, invented a new policy rule that wasn't very appealing. The person posted it on the internet, I think it was on the Reddit forum for this software, and be like, this is and like they just saw a huge raft of cancellations off the back of it, and then they had to go out and publicly state, no, this isn't right. But kind of to the extent the damage has been done by that point.
I suppose we're in the early stages of generative AI. I mean, ChatGPT was only released in November 22, but when you compare the AI rise, if you like, compared to other technologies, has this one had the quickest impact or the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time? Or I don't know, were there other technologies? I don't know if you are in the crypto world when there was that boom, or if you've seen different technologies take off like that.
Yeah, I think crypto's still quite speculative, right? There's definitely AI's come a lot quicker into actual like real life use cases where people generally are using that in their day to day. We see it in there's AI apps that you can get that can help you manage your day-to-day life and your diary and things like that, right? And then I think you'd probably be quite hard to find a firm now that hasn't used AI in some way, whether it's just simple like document drafting or using it for research purposes. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely been quite a big rise, and I've necessarily wasn't one of the early adopters, but over the past year since joining Creditspring, I've started been looking at how can we actually use it, but be mindful of it's not without risk.
I suppose it goes back to trust and understanding of what it can do, and that is a nice segue back into product. And when you look at Creditspring's product offering, and we look at high cost lenders in the past, if we look at like a Wonga, for example, once a unicorn, now nothing. How do you build reputation, differentiate yourself in a market that can be perceived a certain way?
Yeah, I think the product is central, right? Sort of spoke about it a little bit earlier. You know, if you don't have a really good product that customers actually like and is designed to meet their needs, then you know you're not going to have a sustainable business model. So I was saying we saw payday and sort of guarantor lenders came and go as well. Those industries are pretty much gone now, right? So you do need that product. You know, at Creditspring we've designed a product that's simple and our members love it. It's also transparent. You know, APRs, interest rates. You know, a lot of people, they don't necessarily. These are things we aren't really taught about at school, right? When you do all your maths, you don't get those real life teaching of how to use maths in that way. So we have you borrow you borrow a sum of money, and there's a fixed cost. There's no other additional charges. Whether you're late, your debt never grows. You know that is what you pay. That it's simple. It's transparent. And I think the thing is around sort of more to do with the culture of an organisation. You know, there was a kind of academic paper from the 90s, I think, from the Harvard Business School around what they call the service profit chain, which is kind of simplify it to, if you have a good product that customers love, that builds that loyalty, and you look after them, you kind of, that brings the money in, right? And then that keeps your shareholders happy. And then if you look after your people and reinvest in them, they're happy in their role, and they will go out there and do more things for your customers, and that kind of just carries on going. And I think that, you know, you need that in any financial services firm, particularly if you're in a smaller firm. You know, you're not a big bank with all this diverse product mix. You know, if you want to grow and have a sustainable business model, that's key.
Who are Creditspring's main competitors? And we look at differentiation, like how do you message that, or help marketing and product to message that?
I'm gonna have to. I might get in trouble for
Oh, we can cut it out.
Yeah, no. I think it's interesting, right? Because we talk about your guarantor lenders. You know, that industry's kind of shrunk. Or the payday lenders, I think there's a couple around, but you know, people just, you know, they're not, the volume of people aren't going to them. Doorstep lending, you know, kind of thing has kind of gone largely because of the digital age. You know, but so in that non-prime space, there's not many firms. I think there's a few non-prime, subprime credit cards out there still going. But you know, that demand that was there 10 years ago that fueled the Wongas and all those there hasn't gone away. Illegal money lending's on the rise. You know, so
oh really? Didn't know that.
Yeah, it's been creeping up again because of, you know, market conditions where there's not as easy access for people.
Is that just essentially loan sharks and people going for people who need money?
Yeah, illegal money loan sharks. So that's on the rise. So, and the FCA says, you know, that in their latest portfolio letter, and it comes out some of the stuff government's saying is, you know, they want a affordable, sustainable subprime credit market. You know, but it is difficult and it's hard. I think from a firm's perspective, you know, financing these loans now from sort of where you get finance from lenders is more expensive. There's less appetite for it, probably because of the public reputation, but probably more because of the quick decline of the Wongas of that. And I've now no doubt that there was some institutional investors that lost a lot of money with those firms going bust, right? So it is difficult. I don't think we necessarily have too many competitors that are really on the same sort of size that we are now, but that's a good opportunity for us.
Yeah, why is that though? Why do you think no one's thought about, okay, we'll make it transparent, we'll make it fixed? Like, I don't know, I don't know much about the founders of Creditspring, but what's the kind of story there and the mission, I guess? Yeah,
so our mission is to help over 2 million people in the UK, and part of what we do is not just around the loan product. It's a core feature of it, but we have, you know, we talk about our members, so we give people access to a credit facility, but we also have a benefits finder tool where we found over £1 billion worth of unclaimed benefits for our members. We provide
how does that work, the benefits finder tool?
So our members can access it. It's quite simple. You put in some of their basic details, and then it checks about, right, based on what this is the sort of benefits that you may be entitled to, and it helps people know, oh, actually, yeah, there is this additional help I can get. We also have recently launched like a financial education platform. Again, this is all no additional charge to our members. So it's got information in there about our products and services, which can help them as well. But it's also got information on things like budgeting and how to manage your finances a bit better. It may seem counterintuitive to a loan company to want to help our customers do that, because in time it may mean that less people need to borrow money for us. But that's part of our purpose. I mean, it's part of the product. We spoke about, you have a good product that people like. It's not just here's a loan. It's like, actually I get quite a lot of benefits from being a member with Creditspring.
I guess it's sort of like a dating app in the sense that if a good dating app gets you off the dating app.
I've been married for quite a while. No, I'm not using dating apps. I wouldn't know.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting that you have those 2 million customers. Are they considered vulnerable customers because they're in this market that they need short-term loans, or how do you categorize the type of customer within that group?
Yeah, I think we don't categorize them as vulnerable off the bat. I think it's fair to say that some of the customers are more likely to be vulnerable due to their financial circumstances than someone who may have access to more mainstream credit. But I think it'd be quite condescending of us to say, right, we treat all of you as vulnerable. So we take all of our customers, all of our members, based on their situation they're in and what their needs are. And vulnerability is interesting. It's also why firms find it difficult, I think, because there's a whole spectrum of different things that can make someone vulnerable, and some of those are transitory and some of them are longer term. But also, if we had the exact same circumstances in our lives, I may be okay in dealing with that, and it may not make me particularly vulnerable because whereas you may find that more difficult. So even if all things being equal, like people being different, so yeah, we don't necessarily badge any cohort of customers as vulnerable, and we treat everyone based on how they need to be treated based on their needs.
What is Creditspring's definition of a vulnerable consumer in that sense then? Because it sounds it's quite subjective and it will vary.
Yeah, we think we've got the same definition that's set out by the FCA, which I think you'd be hard pressed to find a financial services firm that doesn't have that definition. So and that's kind of the centerpiece of what we train our people on, things like that. But we talk about really asking those questions. Don't just because someone says a word right about a certain vulnerability, we don't just then mark them as vulnerable. Then we have a conversation with them, asking some questions. Is there anything else we need to do to help them? And a lot of times it's no. You look at people with sort of accessibility needs, physical health needs, which is one of the sort of characteristics of vulnerability. But with technology and people who've lived with, whether that may be a sight impairment for their whole life, is actually I don't need you as a firm to do anything different. I can manage it. I've got screen reading capabilities. I'm fine. I can use your website and your services. So yeah, it's a very personal thing for people, and we it's what we kind of speak to our people. Just listen to the people, treat them as an individual.
Yeah, it's probably why the benefits finder, these helpful tools that you add at no cost, has been so useful and like you say, loved by the members. What is coming in the roadmap that you're particularly excited about?
So in the short term, it's kind of we know there's more demand there for our products. So it's continuing to do what we do in terms of providing more loans to consumers that need them. Our products team are always thinking about what next, in terms of potential other lending products we can do, but also about those other value add services that we can provide as well outside of the core product. We're always looking to add more for customers, and from my point of view as a compliance professional, when you look at consumer duty products and services and fair value assessment, it's like, well, this is it's pretty easy, but it's one of the things I never worry about really, because we look at, even when you look at APR, right, which is the way you can compare like for like or costs for loans, right? We, against the other firms in this space, we're competitive on price alone, right? But then you look at, it's not just a price, it's about value as well. And it's like, well, actually we have the benefits finder and we do this, and we've got partner offers as well, but people get discounts with other service providers where it kind of aligns to our ethos. So you add all that in as well. And yeah, it makes my life a little bit easier.
Yeah, as part of that, I guess there's the scanning of different regulatory changes, legal cases. We talked about the motor industry at the moment. So how do you stay on top of things, like alongside all the other stuff you're doing? How do you make sure that anything that changes in the regulation, you're there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of sources which I think most people use, like the FCA are quite good in the information they put out. They have daily emails, have weekly emails. There's the regulatory initiatives grids. All the consultants and the law firms have their updates. So it's kind of, it's not too hard with actually just getting all of that information in. The challenge, what takes time, is actually kind of working out what's relevant, what's important. What do I need to let the business know about early? So we spoke about the product sales data reporting. On the face of it might not seem like a big thing, but then when you looked at actually all the amount of data we're going to have to structure in a certain way to provide to the FCA through reg data was a huge project. And that was one of the things we kind of picked up early on and spoke to our teams internally, and there was a bit of a shock when we first went, and here's everything we need to start doing. So I think that's the challenge in
preparation for that.
In preparation for it, and we've had to hire some extra people in the data team to manage it because it's a huge piece of work. So I think that's the challenge, and it's a skill you need as a compliance professional in terms of working through all of that information, all the different consultation papers, all the early sight of what's coming out, and sort of helping prioritise, work out what's really relevant, what's important, and your stakeholders to engage with and when to engage with them about it.
That's about when you talk about moving from the FCA into industry, that again presenting, getting stakeholders on board, that's a prime example of it, right?
Yeah, it's a huge thing, right? Our job is to translate that consultation paper or that policy statement, all the rules, into something that's plain English and tangible for the business to pick up and go, right, I know what I need to do to comply with this by that deadline. And it takes time and practice.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's, I was going to say, but it applies to any disciplines, right? Whether you're marketeers, you have your own lingo, your engineers, everyone, and it's an important skill, I think, for anyone to have in terms of being able to communicate with people who are necessarily not up to date with that lingo. A former boss gave me, he said, so my wife doesn't work in this space, and he said, if you explain it to your wife what you're going to say, and if she doesn't understand it, then you probably need to go back to the drawing board and think, actually, I need to change the way I've written this paper or explain it in a different way.
It's almost like brutal simplicity, even though it's something that's super complex and difficult to understand.
Yeah,
I get it. Okay, moving on to final couple of questions. If there was a piece of advice you could give a junior compliance person starting out, what would that be?
Yeah, so just be solution focused, right? And it ties in with that kind of being a collaborative compliance person or function. You shouldn't just be going, well, here's a problem, or this isn't right. It's about why it isn't right, explaining it in a way that they can understand and presenting potential options. And it might not be like necessarily saying, well, you should say this instead, but it's sort of giving that guidance about here's the kind of way we can change whether it's in financial promotions, the language, so it's more clear, or in the product. I think it goes a long way. I think, it builds on that. You don't just know the regulations, and I think don't necessarily talk about on this handbook rule says this and this, because you can kind of get lost in it. I think that's probably the one piece of advice.
Adam, great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was good to chat.
Yeah.